Vincent Morelli pressed the burning cigarette into the back of the young woman's hand and watched her scream with the same expression a man might wear reading a boring newspaper. He didn't even look up from the photograph on his desk, a photograph of Emily Carter, smiling unaware, walking out of a grocery store with a bag of oranges and a get-well balloon for her dying sister. "Find her," he said quietly, dropping the photograph into a manila envelope. "And make sure she understands what happens to people who think they can just disappear on me." The woman on the floor was still crying. He stepped over her like she was furniture. That photograph would reach 3 different cities before midnight, and Emily Carter had absolutely no idea. If this is your first time here, welcome, and please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's get into it, because what happened next on that pier in Seattle will stay with you for a long, long time. The rain had been falling for 6 hours straight by the time Emily Carter reached the end of Pier 17. Not the kind of soft Pacific Northwest rain that locals barely noticed anymore. The kind that made tourists pull up their hoods and keep walking. This was the other kind, the kind that felt personal, that came in sideways, that soaked through a coat in under a minute and turned the wooden planks of an old fishing pier into something closer to ice. The kind of rain that made you feel like the sky itself had decided it was finished being gentle. Emily was 31 years old, and she moved like someone who had already accepted that she was going to die tonight. Not because she wanted to. That was the thing people would never understand if anyone ever found out. She wasn't walking to the end of that pier because she had given up on life. She was walking to the end of that pier because she had already calculated, with the cold precision of a woman who had spent 3 years doing Vincent Morelli's accounting, that dying here was the single best option available to her. She had the numbers memorized the way other women memorize their children's birthdays. Lily's hospital bill, $412,000. The amount Vincent had promised to pay, $412,000. The amount Vincent had actually transferred to the clinic in Zurich, 0. The amount Emily had personally skimmed from his accounts to make up the difference, believing she could replace it before anyone noticed, $87,000. The amount Vincent had discovered all of it. The amount of time he had given her to return it, 72 hours, which had run out at 6 o'clock this evening. And then there was a number that didn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet. The number of men who had come to her apartment 2 nights ago and taken turns explaining to her very calmly what Vincent Morelli did to people who stole from him, what they did to their families, what they did to sick younger sisters in expensive Swiss clinics who had no idea their big sister had made a deal with the devil to keep them alive. Emily had stopped running somewhere around midnight. She'd made it 17 blocks on foot in the rain before her left ankle, which she was fairly certain was broken after the fall down the fire escape, finally refused to carry her any further. She'd made it to the waterfront on sheer adrenaline and something that felt less like courage and more like the absence of any other option. The pier stretched out ahead of her into the dark, maybe 60 yards of rotting wood and rusted cable, and beyond it there was nothing but black water and the sound of the storm. She took another step forward. Her ribs screamed at her. 2 of them at minimum. She could feel the particular sharp wrongness of it every time she breathed. The metal scaffolding she'd grabbed on the way down the fire escape had caught her across the side, and for a few terrible seconds she'd thought it had gone through her. It hadn't, but the wound it had left was deep enough that her shirt had been soaked red before she made it to the first corner. She pressed her left hand against her side and kept walking. She was thinking about Lily, not the Lily in the hospital bed in Zurich, thin as paper, and trying to make jokes about her hair falling out. The Lily from before 15 years old, dancing in their mother's kitchen in Tacoma to a pop song on the radio, flour on her face from the biscuits they'd been making. Laughing so hard she couldn't stand up straight, grabbing Emily's hands and spinning her around the kitchen while their mother leaned in the doorway and shook her head and smiled. That was the Lily Emily was trying to hold on to. That was the Lily she had sold everything she had to keep alive. She was 10 feet from the end of the pier when her ankle gave out completely. She went down hard on both knees, and the pain was extraordinary, a white-hot burst of it that wiped out everything else for a full 5 seconds. She stayed there kneeling on the wet wood, hands braced on the planks, head down, breathing through her teeth. The water below her was invisible in the dark. She could hear it, the slap and pull of it against the old pilings. Patient, unhurried. "I'm sorry, Lily," she said out loud. Her voice was barely audible over the rain. She started to push herself forward, and then she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't move, didn't turn around. Her first thought was that it was one of Vincent's men, that they'd followed her, that they'd waited until she reached the end of the pier so there would be nowhere left to run, so the whole thing could be made to look like exactly what it almost was. Her second thought was that it didn't matter anymore. The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched out between them, her and whoever was standing there behind her in the rain. And then a voice said very quietly, "Why didn't you call me?" She did turn around then because the voice was wrong. It wasn't one of Vincent's men. Vincent's men didn't sound like that, low and controlled, but with something underneath it, something that wasn't coldness at all, but rather the opposite, someone working very hard to keep their voice steady. She could barely see him in the dark. A tall figure standing maybe 15 feet away, dark coat plastered to him by the rain, not moving. She couldn't make out his face. "Who are you?" she said. He took one step closer and crouched down so they were closer to eye level. And even then, even in the dark, in the rain, in the pain that was making the edges of her vision flicker, she knew she'd never seen him before in her life. "My name is Damien Vaughn," he said, "and you need to stop moving toward that water." She stared at him. "I don't know you." "I know." He didn't move any closer, just stayed there crouched in the rain like he was waiting for something. "I know you don't, but I know you, Emily. I've known who you are for a long time." "That's not less frightening," she said flatly. "That's more frightening." Something crossed his face. She still couldn't see it clearly, but she thought it might have been the ghost of something almost like a smile. "Fair enough. I'm going to come a little closer because I can see you're bleeding badly and I need to know how bad it is. I'm not going to touch you without your permission. I'm just going to look. I don't need your help. I know you believe that." He moved 2 steps closer, slowly, keeping his hands visible in that deliberate way that told her he was someone who knew how people reacted when they were cornered and frightened. "I'm asking you to let me help anyway." "Why?" He looked at her for a long moment. The rain came down between them. "Because," he said finally, "I found you the last time someone tried to kill you, and I wasn't fast enough then. I'm not willing to be late twice." She went very still. "Prague," she said. Something shifted in his expression. "You remember?" "I remember waking up in an alley," she said slowly. "I remember that the 2 men who'd been following me for 3 days were gone. I remember thinking I'd imagined the whole thing because I had a fever and I'd barely slept." She paused. "That was you. That was me. That was 4 years ago." Boom, yes. "You've been watching me for 4 years. Watching over," he said carefully. "There's a difference." She should have been more frightened by that. The rational part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through 3 years of working for Vincent Morelli reading rooms, calculating risks, knowing when to smile and when to disappear, that part was sending up red flares, warning signals, every alarm it had. Stranger on a pier at midnight, claiming to have watched her for 4 years. That was not a sentence that ended well. But the other part of her, the part that was bleeding onto the planks of a rotting pier and had a broken ankle and 2 fractured ribs and nowhere left to go, that part was doing something she hadn't expected. It was listening. "You need to get off this pier," Damien said. He'd moved closer again, close enough now that she could see his face properly. He was older than his voice had suggested, mid-40s maybe, with dark eyes and the kind of face that had made its peace with being hard to read. There was a cut on his jaw that looked fresh. He'd been in a hurry to get here. "The bleeding from your side is worse than you think it is. I need to get you somewhere I can treat it." "There's nowhere to go," she said. "You don't understand. If I go back out there, Vincent's men are not going to be a problem after tonight." She looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means that while you were walking to this pier, I was making phone calls." He held out his hand, not grabbing for her, just offering. "I need you to trust me for the next 40 minutes. Just 40 minutes. Can you do that? I don't trust anyone." "I know. You haven't been able to since you were 26 years old and you found out what Morelli actually was." He said it simply, no drama, like he was reciting facts from a file. "You've been carrying everything alone since then because you decided the risk of trusting anyone was too high. You've been right about that. The people you've been surrounded by weren't trustworthy." A pause. "I'm asking you to decide whether I am." "Based on what?" she said. "Based on 40 minutes. Based on the fact that I'm standing on a pier in a Seattle rainstorm at midnight, he said, and I'm not here because anyone sent me, and I'm not here because I want anything from you, and you're going to bleed out in the next 20 minutes if you don't let me help you. She looked at his outstretched hand. She thought about Lily and Zurich. She thought about the fact that if she died on this pier, there would be no one left to fight for Lily. Not one single person. Their mother was gone. Their father had never existed in any meaningful way. There was only Emily. There had only ever been Emily. She took his hand. He was careful, more careful than she expected, as he helped her to her feet. When she hissed through her teeth at the pain in her ankle, he adjusted immediately, taking more of her weight without being asked, without making a thing of it. "Can you walk?" he said. "I can walk." "You're going to tell me that every time I ask, aren't you?" "Probably." He almost smiled again. She caught the edge of it in the dark. "There's a car at the end of the dock. One of mine. He'll take us straight to no hospitals," she said immediately. "Not a hospital. I have a doctor. Private. You're not the first person who's needed to stay off the grid." He started moving slowly, matching her pace, even though his pace was clearly meant to be 3 times faster. "I also need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without panicking. I'm currently bleeding through my shirt on a pier in a rainstorm," she said. "I think my panic threshold is higher than average right now." "Your sister's treatment was interrupted 2 days ago," he said. "The clinic received a call suggesting that the account funding her care had been flagged for investigation. They paused treatment as a precaution." He felt her flinch, a full body thing, involuntary, a sound that started in her chest. He continued before it could turn into something worse. "I had my people contact the clinic 4 hours ago. Lily's treatment has been reinstated. A new account has been set up that no one associated with Morelli can touch. She's fine, Emily. She's okay." She stopped walking. She stood there on the pier in the rain, and she didn't say anything for a long time because there wasn't anything to say, because the thing that had been coiled around her chest for the last 48 hours, the terror for her sister, that had been running underneath everything else like a second heartbeat, had just loosened just slightly, just enough that she could actually feel how tight it had been. Her face did something complicated. "Why?" she said finally, and her voice came out wrong, rougher than she intended. "Why would you do that? You don't know her. You don't know me. I don't understand what you want." "I know." He kept his voice quiet. "And I understand that doesn't make sense to you. We'll have time to talk about it. Right now, I need you to keep moving before you lose any more blood." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since he'd appeared out of the dark. "If this is a trap," she said, "I want you to know that I'm not afraid of you." "I know you're not." He said it like he meant it as a compliment. "Come on." She walked off that pier on her own 2 feet, one broken one, not which she figured was an acceptable ratio given the circumstances, with Damien Vaughn's arms steady and careful around her shoulders. And behind them, the black water rose and fell against the pilings, patient and unhurried, offering nothing, taking nothing, simply waiting the way water always waited. It did not get what it came for that night. There was a black SUV idling at the base of the dock, and the driver, a broad, quiet man, who introduced himself only as Marcus and asked no questions, already had the back seat laid out with folded blankets and a first aid kit that was significantly more advanced than anything you'd find at a pharmacy. Emily registered this without commenting on it. In her experience, men who had private doctors and drivers with serious medical kits came in 2 varieties, the kind trying to help you, and the kind who needed you alive and functional for purposes of their own. She had not yet determined which variety Damien Vaughn was, but she was alive, and Lily was being treated, and those 2 facts had bought him 40 minutes. She'd figure out the rest later. Marcus drove in silence. Damien sat beside her, not too close, maintaining a careful, deliberate distance, and pulled out his phone and began making calls in a low voice. He wasn't speaking English. Czech, she thought. Or possibly Slovak. Her Eastern European languages were functional, but not fluent. She caught fragments, a name she didn't recognize, the word airport, a number that might have been a flight time. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes and tried to take inventory. Ankle broken, probably, but the kind of break you could walk on for a few days if you were motivated enough. She'd been motivated enough tonight. Ribs 2, maybe 3. The wound in her side deeper than she'd wanted to admit to herself, the kind of thing that needed actual stitches and not just determination. The rest of her bruised in a comprehensive way that it suggested the next several days were going to be profoundly unpleasant. She was alive. She kept coming back to that because it was the most surprising part of the evening. "The man you have at the clinic in Zurich," she said without opening her eyes. "Is he a real doctor?" "She," Damien said. He'd ended his call. "Dr. Annalisa Kraus. She's been practicing oncology for 22 years. She knows who I am, and she'll treat Lily as if she were her own family. I've used her for people I cared about before." "What people?" A pause. "My niece, Maya. She was sick 2 years ago. Different situation, different treatment, but Dr. Kraus was the one who got her through it." Emily opened her eyes and looked at him sideways. "You have a niece?" "I do." "How old at 9? He looked back at her, apparently reading something in her expression. "I know what you're thinking." "I don't think you do. You're thinking that men who do what I do don't have nieces named Maya who are 9 years old. You're trying to figure out where the real version of me is hiding behind the one you're looking at." She considered this. "Something like that. Oh. The real version of me," he said, "is exactly what you're looking at, which is probably more disturbing, not less." She almost laughed. It surprised her, caught her somewhere between a breath and a wince, when the movement pulled at her ribs and came out as more of a rough exhale, but it was still closer to a laugh than anything she'd produced in weeks, maybe months. She could feel the adrenaline starting to ebb. The cold was setting in, the deep bone cold of someone who'd been soaked through for hours, and her hands had started to shake slightly, not from fear, just from exhaustion and blood loss and the body's inevitable settling of accounts after a crisis. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs to steady them. "The Morelli family," she said. "You said they wouldn't be a problem after tonight. I need to understand what that means, specifically." "It means that the financial infrastructure supporting Vincent's operation in the Pacific Northwest has been systematically dismantled over the course of the last 18 hours, Damien said in the tone of a man describing something as ordinary as a grocery list. "His accounts are frozen. His contacts in law enforcement are being dealt with through federal channels. I have a relationship with a specific division of the FBI that finds mutually beneficial arrangements useful. His primary holding company in Delaware was registered to a shell that traces back to an associate of mine. The associate has agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for certain considerations." She stared at him. "You did all of this in 18 hours. "I started 4 days ago," he said, "when I found out what he'd told his men to do to you." The car was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city slid past in blurred lights and wet pavement. "You knew 4 days ago," she said slowly. "Yes." "And you didn't—" She stopped. Restarted. "You knew 4 days ago that he was going to come after me, and you started dismantling his network, and you didn't think to just, I don't know, tell me, warn me, give me some way to—" "I tried," he said, and something in his voice changed, not much, just enough. Just a degree or two of that careful control loosening around the edges. "I sent someone I trusted to your apartment building on Tuesday night. He was supposed to make contact, explain the situation, get you somewhere safe before any of it got this far." He paused. "You weren't there. You'd already gone." She thought about Tuesday night, the first night she'd run, when she'd heard one of the men in the hallway outside her door and had gone out the window instead of waiting to find out who it was. She hadn't waited because she'd learned a long time ago that waiting was how you ended up with no options. "Your man," she said. "Tall, dark jacket." "Probably. I saw him from the fire escape. I thought he was one of Vincent's." Something that might have been pain crossed Damien's face very briefly. "I know. And you've just been since Tuesday. You've been trying to find me." "Since Tuesday," he confirmed. "Yes." She thought about this last 72 hours. The running. The shelters she'd stayed in for a few hours before moving again. The payphone calls to the clinic in Zurich that had gone increasingly badly. The ankle turning on that fire escape on Thursday morning. The moment on that pier when she had genuinely calculated that there was no way forward and had made her peace with it. And the whole time apparently someone had been looking for her. She didn't know what to do with that. It had been such a long time since the calculus of her life had included anyone looking for her that she genuinely didn't have a framework for it. She turned and faced forward again, watching the wet street through the windshield, and tried to assemble herself. "I need something from you," she said. "Name it." I need to talk to Lily, tonight before anything else. She looked at him. Can you make that happen? He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a phone not his own, a second one, the kind you bought with cash that left no trail. He held it out to her. Dr. Krause's personal line is already in there. She's expecting a call tonight, regardless of the hour. She looked at the phone in his hand for a moment. Then she took it. 40 minutes, she said. You asked for 40 minutes. I did. You're going to need more than that. He looked at her steadily. I know. I'm not agreeing to anything, she said. I'm not agreeing to trust you. I'm not agreeing to believe any of this. I'm agreeing to make a phone call to my sister and then have someone look at my ribs, and then we are going to have a very long conversation about every single thing you just told me, and I'm going to need documentation and proof, and I'm going to ask questions that I expect honest answers to. Agreed. And if anything you've told me turns out to be a lie, it won't be. If it is, she said, I will find a way to make that a problem for you, regardless of the difference in our respective resources. I want to be clear about that. He looked at her, and this time she could see it fully, whatever that expression was on his face. It wasn't amusement exactly. It was something more complicated than that. Something that looked, against all probability, like respect. I believe you, he said simply. Marcus pulled the car to a stop in front of a building in a quiet part of the city that Emily didn't immediately recognize. Damien was out of the car and at her door before she'd finished figuring out how to make her broken ankle cooperate. He offered his arm again the same way he had on the pier, available, not insistent. She took it. They walked through the front door of the building, and the warmth hit her like something physical, and she realized for the first time how cold she actually was. Damien said something to the man at the desk. Low quick, a name she didn't catch, and they were moving again. Elevator hallway, a door that opened into a room that was warm and clean and nothing like what she'd been expecting. A woman in her 50s looked up from a laptop as they came in. She had silver-streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the kind of face that had seen enough that nothing surprised it anymore. She looked at Emily with quick professional eyes that cataloged the damage without flinching. She's lost blood, Damien said. I can see that, the woman said. Vi? She stood and moved to Emily directly, not going through Damien. I'm Dr. Lena Park. I work with Damien. I need to look at your side. Can I do that? Are you actually a doctor? Johns Hopkins class of 1996, board certified in emergency medicine. I have my license in my bag if you want to see it. Please, Emily said. Dr. Park retrieved it without comment and handed it over. Emily examined it. The photo matched the credentials, looked real. The expiration was current. She handed it back. Okay, she said, you can look. While Dr. Park worked efficiently without unnecessary commentary, asking only the questions directly relevant to what she was doing, Emily found the contact already in the phone Damien had given her. She pressed call. It rang twice. Hello, a woman's voice accented, careful. Dr. Krause. I'm calling about Lily Carter, Emily said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. A brief pause. Ah, yes, I've been hoping you would call. Your sister is doing very well tonight. We resumed her third treatment cycle this afternoon. She's been asking for you. Emily closed her eyes. Can I talk to her? Of course. One moment. There was a sound of movement, a door, soft institutional sounds, and then M. Lily's voice, thin, tired, but fully, entirely, unmistakably alive. Hey, Bug. Emily's voice broke on the second word. She pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment hard. Hey, how are you feeling? Like someone's been using my immune system for target practice, which they basically have been. A pause. You sound weird. Are you okay? I'm okay, Emily said. I had a rough night, but I'm okay. I promise Lily, I'm okay. Another pause. I got flowers today. Big ridiculous ones like something out of a movie. The card just said keep fighting and didn't have a name on it. Do you know anything about that? Emily opened her eyes. Across the room, Damien had his back to her, studying something on his phone. He didn't look up. No idea, she said. Sounds like you have a secret admirer. Lily made a sound that was absolutely her laugh, exhausted and genuine at the same time. A mysterious benefactor sending me hospital flowers. This is a new development in my life. You've always been magnetic, Emily said. They talked for 11 minutes. Emily knew because she was watching the clock on the phone, watching each minute pass with a particular intensity, cataloging each second of Lily's voice as something that existed, something that was real. Lily complained about the hospital food and bragged about having beaten two of the nurses at cards and told Emily about a book she was reading and asked 3 separate times whether Emily was really genuinely okay. Emily said yes each time. When they hung up, she sat with the phone in her lap for a moment. Dr. Park was finishing up the last of the stitches, 8 of them in the end, and had already wrapped Emily's ribs with a competence that suggested she'd done it many times before. "Your ankle is a hairline fracture," she said. "Not as bad as it could be. You need to stay off it as much as possible for the next 2 to 3 weeks, which I suspect you will not do." "Probably not," Emily agreed. "I'll give you something for the pain. Not enough to impair you. I'm guessing you'd prefer that." "You're guessing right," Dr. Park finished and stepped back. "She's going to need to rest," she said to Damien, who had turned back around at some point during the last few minutes. "I know. More than an hour, more than one night." She fixed him with a look that suggested she was not unaccustomed to overriding his preferences when it came to the health of people he brought to her. "I mean actual rest. Whatever it is you're planning, it can wait until she's ready." He said it simply, like it wasn't a question. Like waiting was simply what would happen. Emily looked at him across the room. She thought about the pier, the way he'd crouched down in the rain to get to her eye level. The way he'd kept his hands visible, had moved slowly, had asked instead of taken. She thought about his voice when he'd said, "I tried," and the way the control had slipped just slightly around the edges of it. She thought about the flowers in Lily's hospital room, ridiculous and unnamed. She was not going to decide tonight whether she trusted Damien Vaughn. Tonight was far too raw and far too recent for any decision like that to mean anything real. But she was going to stay. Tonight. In this warm room with a doctor who had shown her credentials without being asked, and a man sitting in the chair by the door, who had not touched her without permission and had not lied to her about anything she could verify, and had sent flowers to her dying sister without putting his name on the card. Tonight she was going to stay, and she was going to figure out the rest in the morning. She lay back on the cot that Dr. Park had guided her to, and she stared at the ceiling, and she listened to the rain still falling outside the window, and she thought about a kitchen in Tacoma, and a girl dancing with flour on her face, and she held on to that image with everything she had. Outside, the city hummed and glistened in the wet dark. And in an office somewhere across town, Vincent Morelli was looking at his phone and discovering one by one that the names he was calling weren't picking up anymore. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. She slept for 14 hours. Emily didn't mean to. She'd told herself she would close her eyes for an hour, maybe 2, just enough to let her body stop shaking, and then she would get up and start asking the questions she needed answered. That was the plan. That was always the plan with Emily Carter. She made the plan, she executed the plan, she did not let the plan slip sideways into 14 hours of unconscious, dead-weight sleep on a cot in a stranger's safe house, while the world continued without her. But her body had apparently decided it was done taking orders. She came back to consciousness slowly in pieces, the way you did after the kind of exhaustion that went past tired into something structural. The pain was the first thing, her ribs announcing themselves with considerable authority the moment she tried to roll over her ankle, registering a firm objection to the angle it had settled at. She lay still for a moment, cataloging, getting her bearings. The room was quiet. Morning light, pale and thin, came through the edges of the window. Someone had put a blanket over her at some point. She had no memory of that happening. She sat up carefully, breathing through the rib pain, and looked around. Damien was in the chair by the door, asleep, head tilted back slightly, still in the same clothes from last night, a jacket that had dried into a shape that suggested it had been thoroughly soaked at some point. He looked for the first time since she'd seen him like something other than completely composed. He looked like a man who had sat in a chair all night to make sure she was okay and had eventually lost the fight with his own exhaustion. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, tested her ankle, decided it was survivable, and went to find coffee. The kitchen was down the hall and it was empty except for Marcus, the driver, who was sitting at a table with a newspaper and a cup of something, and looked up when she appeared without any visible surprise. "Coffee's on the counter," he said. Dr. Park left pain medication in the cabinet above it. "She said you'd refuse it, but she wanted it there anyway." Smart woman, Emily said and took the coffee and the medication both. She sat across from Marcus and wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at him steadily. He was maybe 50, built like someone who had done hard physical work for a long time and had not stopped. His face was careful in the way that faces got when they'd spent years in environments where showing the wrong expression at the wrong moment had consequences. How long have you worked for him? She said. 11 years. Is he a good man? None. Marcus looked at her over his newspaper. The question seemed to sit with him for a moment. He's the most complicated man I've ever known, he said finally, which isn't an answer and I know it isn't. But it's the honest one. I can work with honest, she said. I know. He folded his newspaper. He told me you would come in here and start asking questions the second you were awake. He told me to answer them. All of them. All of them. She set down her coffee. Why has he been watching me for 4 years? Marcus was quiet for a moment, not evasive considering, she thought, choosing words carefully. Prague was supposed to be a routine operation, he said. Damien was there for business, legitimate business, the foundation side of things, nothing to do with the other work. He was in the wrong street at the wrong time, and he saw 2 men following a woman who didn't know she was being followed. He said later that it was the way you walked that you were scared, but you weren't showing it. And he recognized that. He made a decision in the moment. He just interfered for a stranger. That's how he's always been, Marcus said simply. The part that surprised him was afterward. He had someone look into who you were just to know you'd made it out okay. And what he found, he stopped. I think he should tell you the rest of that part. She heard footsteps in the hallway and turned. Damien appeared in the doorway, awake now, hair slightly disordered in a way that looked wrong on him, like seeing the frame of a painting without the canvas. He looked at Emily and then at Marcus and seemed to read the shape of the conversation from the air. How much did you tell her, he said. Prague, Marcus said, and that you should tell her the rest. Damien looked at Emily. Good morning. What did you find, she said, when you had someone look into who I was? What did you find that made you keep watching? He crossed to the counter, poured himself coffee, and turned back to face her. I found that you had been working for Vincent Morelli for 8 months, he said, doing his books, and I found out why. Lily's diagnosis, the treatment costs, the fact that you'd burned through every legitimate option and had nowhere left to go. He looked at her steadily. I found out that you weren't a criminal. You were a sister who'd run out of choices. That doesn't explain 4 years of surveillance. No, he said, it doesn't. He set his coffee down. The real explanation is that I was in a position to help you get out of that situation, and I didn't. I told myself you were making your own choices. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself I had enough of my own situations to manage. His jaw tightened slightly. And then 6 months later, one of my contacts told me that Morelli had moved you from bookkeeping to something more dangerous, courier work, moving certain kinds of money through certain kinds of channels. And I realized that the window for you to walk away cleanly was closing, and I still didn't act. Why not? Because acting would have meant explaining why I'd been paying attention in the first place, and I didn't have a clean answer for that. Emily looked at him. What does that mean? He was quiet for a moment. The morning light was getting stronger. Outside somewhere, a car passed, ordinary, unhurried. It means that from the moment I saw you in Prague, he said carefully, I have not been entirely objective about your situation. And I was aware of that, and I thought the right thing was to maintain distance rather than complicate things. The kitchen was very quiet. Marcus stood up and said, I'm going to check on the car, and left with the efficiency of a man who understood when he was not needed. Emily and Damien looked at each other across the kitchen. I need you to be clear about what you're saying, she said, because I don't have the bandwidth right now for ambiguity. I'm saying that I should have helped you sooner. I'm saying that I let a personal hesitation interfere with something practical, and that what happened on that pier last night is partially on me. He met her eyes. I'm sorry for that. She absorbed this. She thought about what it meant, the specific shape of it. Not the other part, not yet. That part needed to go somewhere else and wait, but the concrete meaning of it. The fact that someone with Damien Vaughn's resources had been able to help her for years and had chosen not to because he was being careful with himself. That's a luxurious kind of scruple, she said finally. for someone in your position. Yes, he said. It was. Don't do it again. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. I won't. She picked up her coffee. Now tell me about Vincent. Tell me what you actually know about what he was using me for, because I have my own theory, and I need to know how wrong I am. He sat down across from her, and that was when he told her the real shape of the thing. She had known in the way you knew things you didn't want to examine too closely that Vincent had reasons for keeping her that went beyond good bookkeeping. She told herself it was because she was useful, because she was clean and educated, and could pass through rooms that his regular people couldn't. She told herself the increased access he'd been giving her to meetings, to names, to the specific architecture of how his money moved was a function of trust of her having proven herself. She had been wrong about that. He knew you were taking money, Damien said. Not from the beginning, but he knew for at least 8 months before he came after you. Emily went very still. He let me. He let you. Because the access you were gaining, the documentation you were inevitably creating, in the process of moving those funds, he needed that paper trail. He needed a fall person with clean hands and a real backstory, someone who could be presented to federal investigators as the architect of the financial structure, someone who had clear motive. Lily, she said, her voice came out flat, paying for Lily's treatment. Yes, he was going to hand me to the FBI, along with enough documentation to make it look like you'd been running his financial network independently, like he was the victim of an inside scheme. Damien watched her face. He's done it before. Different person, different setup, same architecture. She set her coffee mug down with a click that was more controlled than she felt. And the call to the clinic in Zurich, pausing Lily's treatment, that was the pressure mechanism to make sure you wouldn't fight back too hard when the time came, to make sure you'd be too focused on Lily to look at the bigger picture. She sat with that for a moment, the full weight of it. 3 years of her life, 3 years of seeing herself. She was doing what she had to do, of sleeping badly and eating worse and running mental calculations every waking hour to stay one step ahead of the thing she was in. And the whole time she'd been exactly where Vincent Morelli had wanted her to be. Not a person making desperate choices, a piece on a board being moved toward a specific square. He almost had everything he needed, she said. Yes. If I hadn't started running when I did, you would have been arrested within the week. The FBI contact he was working with had already been briefed. The file they were going to receive had your name as primary. He paused. You running wasn't the plan. He assumed the Lily pressure would keep you compliant. When you ran it, destabilized his timeline. Is that why he sent the men to my apartment, not to punish me, but to retrieve you before the FBI moved? You weren't supposed to be loose. You were supposed to be contained, cooperative, and available for a very specific moment. She thought about the man with the cigarette, the way they talked. We just need you to come back, Emily. Mr. Morelli understands you've been under stress. Everything can be worked out. She'd heard the real meaning underneath it, and she'd gone out the window anyway. One of the better decisions of her life, it turned out. The $87,000, she said, the money I took. He doesn't actually care about the money. No, she said. I know. I figured that out about 4 hours into running. She looked at the table. I took it anyway, because Lily needed it, and because I was angry. Good, Damien said. She looked up. Good. You should have been angry. He said it simply. You had every right to be angry, and the money was the least of what he owed you. She looked at him for a long moment. There was something almost disorienting about being in a room with someone who wasn't asking her to minimize what had happened to her. She'd spent 3 years around men who treated her anger as a liability, as something to be managed and smoothed over and redirected. Damien was looking at her like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't entirely know what to do with that. Tell me about your network, she said. Tell me what you actually do, not the foundation side, the other part. That's a long conversation. I have time. Tell me what I need to know to understand who I'm dealing with. He considered her for a moment. I manage money, he said, across a variety of entities, some legitimate, some not. I operate in spaces between legal structures, not criminal, but not entirely transparent either. I have relationships with people in governments, in financial institutions, in law enforcement, on both sides of the law in multiple countries. I use those relationships to manage problems. Whose problems? Sometimes my own, sometimes other people's. A pause. I started doing it for the same reason you started working for Morelli. I needed resources that the legitimate world wasn't going to provide. My situation was different from yours, but the mechanism was the same. You do what you have to do with what you have, and then one day you look up and what you have is considerable, and the things you're able to do are things other people can't. And you decided to become a one-man solution provider. I decided to make myself useful, he said. The one-man part is overstated. I have people. Like Marcus. Like Marcus. Something shifted in his expression. People who chose this. People who know what it is. She thought about what Marcus had said. The most complicated man I've ever known. She was beginning to understand the shape of that. Vincent isn't finished, she said. Frozen accounts and compromised contacts, that's significant, but it's not the same as finished. He'll have contingencies. He does. And he knows I'm alive. If your people made contact with the clinic in Zurich, if Lily's treatment was reinstated, he's going to know something intervened. He's going to look for the pressure point. Yes, Damien's voice was steady, which is why I need to talk to you about the next 48 hours. Tell me, he told her. It was more complicated than she'd expected, which was saying something because her expectations had already been calibrated significantly upward from where they'd been 12 hours ago. The plan had components she recognized, the kind of financial dismantling she'd spent 3 years watching from the inside, the way you cut off an organization's oxygen by freezing the accounts that no one knew existed. The accounts hidden behind holdings companies, buried behind trusts, buried behind offshore structures in jurisdictions that didn't ask questions. She'd built some of those structures herself. She'd built them well because she was good at her job, even when her job was terrible. You're going to need me, she said. I know. Not just as someone to keep safe, you're going to need me to access the specific architecture of his financial structure because I built parts of it and I know things your people don't know. Yes, he said, that's true. So the help you're offering isn't entirely selfless. No, he said, it isn't. I'm not going to lie to you about that. He met her eyes directly. I need what you know. You need what I have. Those two things don't have to be in conflict. She thought about it. She thought about the weight of his honesty, the way he said the uncomfortable things plainly without dressing them up. She'd spent 3 years with a man who wrapped every knife in silk before he handed it to you. The directness was startling. She kept expecting the other shoe. I want something specific in return, she said. Name it. When this is over, when Vincent is finished, when Lily is safe, when there's no remaining thread, I walk. I take Lily and we go somewhere we choose, and neither of us owes you anything. No debt, no ongoing arrangement, no understanding that will be useful to you in the future. He didn't hesitate. Agreed. You'll have legal documentation drawn up to that effect. Within the hour, if you want. I do want. He nodded. He picked up his phone and typed something. Somewhere across the city, presumably a lawyer who knew better than to ask unnecessary questions received a message. Emily picked up her coffee again. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. One more thing, she said. Yes. Maya, your niece. Is she with someone right now? Someone reliable? He looked at her. The question had clearly surprised him, not the content of it, but the fact that she'd asked. She's in Colorado, he said. The house there. She's with people I trust. Make sure she stays there until this is finished, Emily said. Vincent has a pattern. When he's cornered, he goes for the thing that hurts most. The people that matter. She looked at him steadily. Don't let her be that. A pause. Something moved behind his eyes, brief and controlled, but she caught it. She'll be kept there, he said. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's practical. She set down the mug. When do we start? There's one more thing you need to know first, he said. His voice shifted just slightly, not toward evasion, but toward care. The specific care of someone who knows the next sentence is going to land hard. About why Vincent used you specifically. About why you, out of everyone he could have put in that position. She looked at him. The man he burned before you, Damien said. The one who took the fall for his previous operation. His name was Daniel Reyes. He paused. He was your father's business partner, 20 years ago. The kitchen went silent. Emily sat very still. Morelli's been collecting leverage on specific families for years, Damien said. People with clean histories and complicated pasts. He didn't find you by accident, Emily. He was looking for someone with your specific background, your specific connection to Reyes, your specific skill set. He held her gaze. You were recruited 4 months before you ever walked into his office looking for work. Every job posting, you responded to every interview that went nowhere. Every door that closed, he was steering you toward his door. He manufactured the conditions that made you feel like he was your only option. She heard a sound. It took her a moment to realize it had come from her. Not words, just the sharp exhale of something that had been hit without warning, the body's involuntary response to impact. He built a trap around me, she said. Yes. Lily's diagnosis, the treatment costs. He didn't cause those, but he watched and waited for a moment of vulnerability, and then he positioned himself as the solution. Yes. She stood up from the table. She needed to be standing for this, needed the solidity of her own 2 feet on the floor even when one of them was broken and protesting. She stood and she breathed, and she did not let what she was feeling run away with her because what she was feeling was the kind of thing that could make you stupid, and she couldn't afford stupid right now. How long have you known this? She said. 18 months, he said. I found out about the Reyes connection 18 months ago. The full scope of the recruitment I confirmed it about 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago? She looked at him. And you didn't tell me. I was trying to find a way to extract you cleanly without... You were protecting me from information about my own life. The sentence came out very quiet. Sometimes the quietest things carried the most weight. He didn't defend it. Yes, he said, that was a mistake. Yes, she said, it was. The silence sat between them. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest, and in her experience, honest discomfort was worth 10 times more than comfortable lies. I'm going to need a few minutes, she said. Take what you need. She walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway and found a bathroom and closed the door and ran cold water over her hands and stared at her own reflection in the mirror and thought about a man she'd never met, Daniel Reyes, who had taken a fall 20 years ago for a crime he probably hadn't designed, and a daughter she didn't know he was connected to, and a machine that Vincent Morelli had built around that connection patient in deliberate building a cage 1 bar at a time. She thought about her mother who had worked 2 jobs for years after their father left and never explained why he'd left, and the specific silence around that topic that Emily had always attributed to pain and now wondered about differently. She thought about Lily in a hospital in Zurich, getting flowers from a man she didn't know, fighting to stay alive. She turned off the tap. She looked at herself in the mirror for one more moment. 31 years old, stitched together, broken ankle ribs, wrapped hair that had done what hair did after a night like last night. Eyes that were tired in a deep way, the kind of tired that didn't fix with sleep. She looked like someone who had just discovered the full shape of the thing that had been done to her. She looked like someone who was going to do something about it. She opened the bathroom door and walked back down the hallway to the kitchen, where Damien Vaughn was still sitting at the table waiting with the particular patience of a man who had learned not to crowd people when they needed a moment. I want to see everything you have, she said. Every file, every piece of documentation, every thread of the operation. And I want to start in the last 3 years, the period I was inside, because there are things I know that aren't in any file and we need to cross-reference. He looked at her. And I want it understood, she said, that from this point forward, you don't decide what I can handle. You give me the information and I decide what to do with it, whatever your reasons were before they're over. Understood, he said. One more thing. She sat back down across from him. The files on Reyes, the connection to my family, I want those too. Emily. All of it, she said. I'm done building my decisions on incomplete information. Give me all of it and let me work with the truth. She held his gaze. I can handle the truth. What I can't handle is being managed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a flash drive and set it on the table between them. Everything I have, he said. It's all there. She looked at the drive. She picked it up. Outside, somewhere across the city, Vincent Morelli was waking up to the news that 3 of his most reliable lieutenants had not checked in the previous night, and that the FBI task force that was supposed to be receiving a carefully prepared file about an inside operator named Emily Carter had instead received something else entirely, A different file from a different direction with a different name at the top. The machine was running. And Emily Carter, for the first time in 3 years, was not in the cage. She was on the other side of it. The flash drive contained 47 folders. Emily knew this because she counted them systematically the way she did everything. Not because she was compulsive, but because she had learned early that the people who survived in the spaces she'd been moving through were the people who didn't skip steps. She sat at the table in the safe house with a laptop Damien's people had provided, and she opened each folder in order. And she did not let herself react, not outwardly, because reacting was a luxury she couldn't afford yet. It took her 3 hours to get through the first pass. By the end of it, her coffee had gone cold twice, and she'd stopped noticing. Marcus had come in at some point and put a plate of food next to the laptop without comment, and she'd eaten it without looking at it. Damien had stayed in the next room. She was aware of him the way you were aware of weather, a kind of peripheral consciousness of presence, not intrusive, just there. When she closed the laptop, she sat still for a moment. Then she said at a volume she knew would carry through the wall, "You need to come in here." He appeared in the doorway within seconds. She thought he'd probably been waiting. "The Delacroix account," she said. "Folder 31. The transfer records from March through August of last year." "What about them?" "I built those structures," she said. "I know them from the inside, and there's something wrong with the architecture that I don't think your people caught." She turned the laptop toward him. Whoever did the secondary analysis on this, they were looking at the outflows. They weren't looking at the inflows on the shadow account. There's a separate stream here that isn't connected to Vincent's primary network. He sat down and leaned in. She watched his face as he looked at what she was pointing to. She saw the moment he registered it. "That's not his money," Damien said. "No," she said. "It isn't. I didn't build that structure. Someone else built it and layered it under mine using my architecture as a shell." She looked at him. "Vincent has a partner, someone with access to the same accounts, but operating a completely separate channel. Someone who's been using his operation as cover for a different stream of I don't know what yet. But it's significant. The volume over 6 months is," she pulled up the calculations she'd already run, "somewhere north of 60 million. Damien was very still. "I need to make a call," he said. "You need to make several." She paused. "And I need to know who your FBI contact is. The one you said has a mutually beneficial relationship with you." He looked at her. "Because if Vincent has a partner at this scale," she said, "and your FBI contact doesn't know about it, then either your contact isn't as plugged in as you think, or your contact is part of it." The silence that followed was the kind that had actual weight to it. "His name is Hargrove," Damien said finally. "Agent Richard Hargrove. He's been my contact for 6 years. Have you told him about me?" "Not your name, not your location. I told him only that I had a witness to Morelli's financial operations who was willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity." "And what was his response?" Damien's jaw tightened slightly. "He said the timing was complicated, that there were procedural considerations, that he'd need to run it up the chain before any formal immunity arrangement could be discussed." Emily looked at him steadily. "In 6 years, has he ever needed to run anything up the chain before?" The answer was on his face before he said it. "No. $60 million, she said. "Moving through structures I built without my knowledge. And your FBI contact suddenly has procedural complications." She closed the laptop. "Damien, who else knows I'm alive?" He was already standing, already reaching for his phone. "Marcus," he said. "Dr. Park. 2 of my people who were on the pier last night." He was dialing before he finished the sentence. "And Hargrove. I told Hargrove last night that the extraction had been successful." She stood up. Her ankle protested she ignored it. "You told him last night?" "Yes." "How many hours ago?" He checked his watch. His expression did something controlled and unhappy. 11 hours ago." "And in those 11 hours, has Vincent Morelli made any moves that your people were able to track?" "No." He said it slowly, the word landing differently as he heard the shape of her question. "He's been quiet, unusually quiet for a man whose network is being dismantled." "He's not quiet because he's scared," Emily said. "He's quiet because someone told him to wait. Someone told him that the situation was being handled from the other direction." She moved around the table toward him. "Where are we right now? Who knows this location?" "Marcus, Dr. Park. And anyone Marcus or Dr. Park have had contact with in the last 12 hours. She put her hand on the wall for balance and looked at him directly. We need to move. Right now. He was already talking into the phone. She heard Marcus's voice on the other end, short and immediate, and within 30 seconds, Marcus was in the doorway with his keys in his hand and an expression that said he'd understood the shape of the situation without needing it explained. There's a secondary location, Damien said to Emily, phone still in hand. 40 minutes from here. No one has the address except Marcus. Not Hargrove. Not Hargrove. Then that's where we go. They were out of the building in under 4 minutes. Emily took the flash drive and the laptop. She took the medication Dr. Park had left because she was practical. She left the coffee, it was cold anyway. In the car, moving Marcus, driving with the focused quiet of someone who'd done this before, Damien sat beside her and made the calls he needed to make. She listened to half of them and let the other half wash over her while she thought. The secondary location turned out to be a house rather than an apartment, smaller, more isolated, set back from the road with mature trees that had nothing to do with aesthetics and everything to do with sightlines. She clocked all of this without being able to explain how she knew to clock it. 3 years with Vincent Morelli had apparently installed certain software that ran in the background regardless of what she wanted. Inside, Damien set up in the main room with 2 laptops and a phone that she noticed was different from the one he'd been using earlier. She sat across from him and reopened the flash drive on her own laptop and went back to folder 31. Tell me about Hargrove, she said without looking up. Everything. How you met him, how the arrangement developed, what he's given you, and what you've given him. Damien talked. She listened and worked simultaneously, cross-referencing the transfer records she knew with the shadow architecture she was only now seeing clearly. Hargrove, FBI, financial crimes, 18 years with the Bureau, recruited by Damien. Through a mutual contact in the banking sector, the relationship based on an exchange of information that benefited both parties. Hargrove had given Damien early warning on federal investigations that touched his network. Damien had given Hargrove case-making material on targets that Hargrove wanted but couldn't reach through conventional means. Classic, Emily said. It worked for 6 years. It worked until someone made him a better offer. She highlighted a series of transactions on her screen. Look at this. The shadow account starts receiving deposits in January of last year. What happened in January of last year that changed the landscape around Vincent's operation? Damien thought for a moment. The Castellano family moved out of the Pacific Northwest, left a significant gap in the regional network. And who moved into that gap? Several players. Vincent was one of them. He expanded faster than expected. He paused. There were federal investigations into 2 of the other players that winter. They both folded unusually quickly. Because Hargrove cleared the field for Vincent, Emily said, in exchange for access to the shadow account. Vincent expanded. Hargrove's partner got $60 million of runway, and everyone was happy. She looked up. Until I accidentally built my accounting structures over the top of their arrangement and created a paper trail that connected everything. They couldn't hand you to the FBI because the FBI investigation would have uncovered the shadow account. They were going to hand me to a specific FBI agent who would make sure the investigation stayed narrow. She sat back. Except then I ran, and you intervened. And now the thing that kept this whole arrangement stable is gone. Hargrove is going to tell Vincent where we are, Damien said. He already tried. He just doesn't have the address. She looked at him steadily. How good is Vincent at finding things he's been told exist but hasn't been given the location of? Very good. Then we have how long before he finds this place? 8 hours, possibly 12 if we're lucky. She looked at the clock. It was just past 2 in the afternoon. Then we have until midnight to finish this, she said. Or we move again and again until we run out of places to move to. He met her eyes. Or we finish it tonight. That's what I said. She turned back to the laptop. I need 3 things. I need your people to freeze the shadow account before Hargrove realizes we've found it. I need documentation of the Hargrove connection delivered to someone inside the FBI who is not Hargrove and who would have reason to be very angry about a 20-year agent running a private arrangement with a criminal enterprise. And I need to know where Vincent Morelli is going to be tonight. The third one is the hardest. It's also the most important. She pulled up a different section of the drive, but I think I might already know. She found it in folder 12, a property record she'd skimmed on the first pass and now read differently. A residential property in the hills east of the city, registered to a shell company she recognized as one of Vincent's tertiary structures. She'd processed the maintenance invoices for it herself 8 months ago, had filed them without thinking much about it. A house that had never in all the time she'd been doing his books appeared in any communication as a meeting location or operational base, which meant it was the one he kept clean, the one no one was supposed to look at. "He'll go to ground here," she said and turned the laptop around. Damien looked at it. He took out his phone and made a call, read out the address, waited, came back to her. "My people have eyes on the block within the hour." "Good." She closed that folder and opened another. "Now I need to tell you something." "Tell me." "The immunity arrangement. The one you offered Hargrove for me that he stalled on." She looked at him directly. "I don't need Hargrove for immunity anymore. The shadow account documentation, if it goes to the right person in the Bureau, it creates a situation where the FBI needs me more than I need them. I become an asset, not a liability. Hargrove loses his leverage. And whoever he reports to has every reason to make things very simple and very clean for the person who handed them a 20-year agent on corruption charges." Damien studied her face. "You worked that out while I was talking." "I worked that out in the first hour with the flash drive," she said. "I was waiting to see if you'd work it out too. You were testing me." "I was calibrating," she said. "There's a difference." She paused. "You passed, by the way." Something shifted in his face, that specific quality she was beginning to recognize. The one that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to warmth in a way that looked slightly unfamiliar on him, like a muscle he didn't use often enough. "I'm gratified," he said dryly. "Don't be too gratified yet. We still have to get through tonight." Marcus came in from the hallway with the efficient energy of someone who'd been busy. "Eyes are on the property," he said. "Black SUV parked on the east side of the block. 2 men visible. There's a light on the second floor." He looked at Damien. "He's there." Emily felt a shift in the room, the way the atmosphere changed when abstract planning became something concrete and immediate. She'd felt it before in Vincent's offices when a meeting moved from discussion to decision. The moment when something that had been theoretical became real. "How many men does he typically keep with him at a location like this?" she said. "At a personal safe house, 4 to 6, Damien said. "He doesn't like large numbers around him when he's in a defensive posture. He trusts small rooms. And your people, more than enough." "I want to be there," she said. He looked at her. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "I'm injured. I'm a civilian. It's not necessary. I've done enough. I know all of those arguments. I'm telling you anyway that I want to be there." "Why?" He said it without challenge, just genuine. She thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because for 3 years I watched Vincent Morelli treat people like furniture," she said. "I watched him make decisions that destroyed lives while eating dinner. I watched him look at a photograph of my sister and use it like a button he could push whenever he wanted. And I ran his numbers." She held Damien's gaze. "I want to look him in the face when it's finished. I need to see that it's actually real." A long pause. "You stay with me," Damien said. "At all times. If I tell you to get down, you get down. If I tell you to go back, you go back." "Agreed. Your ankle." "My ankle will manage." He looked at her for one more moment. Then he nodded. They moved at 10 o'clock that night. Damien's people were good. Emily could see that from the way they operated the economy of communication, the absence of anything theatrical. 4 of them, plus Marcus, plus Damien, plus Emily, in the back of the second car with her broken ankle and her wrapped ribs, and her full attention on what was happening. Marcus had given her a phone with a live feed from the team outside the property. She watched it while they drove. The black SUV was still there. The light on the second floor was still on. 2 men had done a perimeter check at 9:45 and gone back inside. The house was quiet. "He doesn't know we're coming," she said. "Hargrove tried to call me at 6 o'clock, Damien said. "I didn't answer. He'll have told Vincent something is wrong, but not where we are. He genuinely didn't know the address. So Vincent knows we're moving against him tonight, but he doesn't know when or how. He'll be nervous." "Good," Damien said. "Nervous men make mistakes." They parked 2 blocks from the property. Damien's people moved first. She watched from the car as they went, efficient and quiet, and then Marcus said, "We move now," and she was out of the car and moving before the sentence finished. Her ankle hurt with every step. She kept moving. They came in through the side entrance, a gate that one of Damien's people had already dealt with, and crossed the yard and entered through the back of the house. She heard rather than saw the first moments of it, raised voices, a door hitting a wall, the specific sound of a situation becoming physical. She stayed close to Damien, the way she'd agreed, and he moved in a way that kept her behind him without making it obvious. A kind of unconscious geometric adjustment that she noticed and filed away. They reached the hallway. Vincent's men, 3 of them on this floor, had already been dealt with by the time Damien and Emily came through. She didn't look too long at the details. She kept her eyes forward. The stairs, the second floor. The light was coming from under the last door on the right. Damien's hand came back flat, a stop signal. She stopped. He looked at her, checking. She nodded once. "I'm okay, keep going." He held her gaze for half a second longer than the situation required, then turned back to the door. Marcus opened it. Vincent Morelli was standing in the middle of the room. He was a man in his early 60s, silver-haired and still well-dressed, even now, even here. Even in a house he was clearly using as a last resort. He held a phone in one hand and a gun in the other, and when the door opened, he raised the gun, and his eyes moved across the room and landed on Emily. And something happened in his face that she would spend a long time thinking about afterward. It wasn't fear. It was fury. The specific fury of a man who had built a perfect system and watched it fail. "You bet on him," he said. His voice was steady. She'd always given him that he was never not steady. "You did this." "Some of it," she said, "not all of it. I gave you everything." He said it like he believed it, like he was genuinely aggrieved. "I gave you the means to save your sister. I gave you a position, resources." "You built a trap," she said. "You built it before I ever walked through your door. You manufactured the conditions and then pretended to rescue me from them." She kept her voice even. "You used my sister as a button. You were going to use me as a fall person for 20 years of your crimes and then walk away clean." She looked at him. "That's not giving someone everything. That's using someone as furniture." His jaw tightened. "Damien Vaughn," he said, not looking at Damien, still looking at her. "You went to him. Of all the, do you know what he is? Do you know what he's done?" "He found me dying on a pier and didn't leave," she said. "That's more than you ever did." Vincent's arm moved. The gun came up. Not toward Damien, toward her. She saw it happen. She registered it with the strange slowness that extreme moments sometimes produce, the way time reorganized itself around the things that mattered most. The gun coming up. Vincent's finger on the trigger. The calculation in his eyes that said she was worth more to him as a problem eliminated than as a problem managed. And then Damien moved. Not away. Forward and sideways, stepping into the line between the gun and Emily, a movement so fast and so absolute that she didn't have time to react before he was already there, already in front of her. And then the sound was enormous in the closed room, and she felt him jerk backward into her, and they went down together, her catching his weight with her good leg, and then both of them going to the ground anyway because his weight was considerable, and the shock of it was total. She heard Marcus. She heard Vincent. She heard none of it clearly. Damien was on the floor beside her, and there was blood on his shoulder, the left shoulder soaking through his jacket. Fast, too fast, and he was looking at her with an expression that wasn't pain exactly, but was the thing right next to it, the kind of look a person had when they were keeping themselves very deliberately in the present moment. "Are you hit?" he said. "No." Her voice came out rough. "No, I'm fine, Damien. I'm okay." He said it with absolute conviction that did not match the blood spreading through his jacket. "The shoulder. It's the shoulder." She looked up. Marcus had Vincent on the ground. 2 of Damien's other people were there, and the gun was gone, and Vincent Morelli was down, and the room was very loud in the aftermath of everything, and also underneath that very still. She looked back at Damien. She looked at the blood. She thought about the pier, about the moment she'd decided that dying was simpler than continuing to fight, about the 11 minutes on the phone with Lily, about the flash drive and the shadow account, and all the ways a machine built to destroy one specific person could be taken apart when someone decided it was worth the effort. She put her hand on Damien's face, just her palm against his jaw, grounding touch, something that said, "I'm here," in a language that didn't need words. He looked at her. "You stepped in front of it," she said. "Yes. You could have." "I know." He held her gaze. "I know what I could have done." She heard Marcus on the phone calling for the medical team, that had apparently been staged 2 blocks away because Damien Vaughn planned for the things he didn't want to plan for. She heard Vincent being handled. She heard the ordinary sounds of a situation resolving itself into something that could be managed. She kept her hand where it was. "Don't do that again," she said. Something crossed his face. "Which part?" "The part where you make a decision about what my life is worth without consulting me." He was quiet for a moment. His breathing was controlled, careful, the kind you did when you were managing pain with the limited tools of focus and stubbornness. "I'll take it under advisement," he said. "Damien." "I would do it again," he said simply. "Every time. I want to be honest about that." She looked at him. She thought about what honesty cost. The specific courage of saying the uncomfortable thing plainly without dressing it up, without the silk wrapping around the knife. She'd been surrounded by people who lied so constantly that the truth had started to feel foreign, had started to sound like a dialect she'd almost forgotten. She had not forgotten it entirely. "I know," she said. Marcus crouched beside them. "Medical is 30 seconds out." He looked at Emily. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "Get him out." She helped her good side, her functional arm, her stubbornness, filling in for the parts of her body that were not currently cooperating as Marcus got Damien to his feet and toward the door. She stayed right beside him, not because anyone asked her to, but because she had decided somewhere between his stepping in front of that bullet and right now that she was not finished deciding things tonight. The medical team was fast and competent and handled Damien with the efficiency of people who had handled him before in situations that apparently also involved being shot, which she made a note to ask about later. She sat beside him in the back of the vehicle, her broken ankle stretched out in front of her, his hands somehow finding hers in the organized case of people working on his shoulder, and she held on. Behind them, the house they'd left was filling with people she didn't know and processes she wasn't responsible for. Federal agents, documentation, the years-long unraveling of a machine that had been built in part specifically around her destruction. It was done, not cleanly, not without cost, but done. Lily was in Zurich fighting and winning with flowers on her windowsill and a doctor who answered the phone at any hour. Vincent Morelli was in a set of zip ties on the floor of his own safe house, and Damien Vaughn was warm beside her, losing blood at a rate that the medical team was managing with authority, holding her hand with the grip of someone who had decided not to let go and hadn't decided differently yet. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. The vehicle moved through the dark city, carrying all of them away from what had happened toward whatever came next. She didn't know what that was. Not yet. She only knew that for the first time in 3 years, she was moving towards something instead of away from it. That was enough. For tonight, that was enough. The surgery took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Emily knew this because she sat in the waiting room of the private clinic on the east side of Manhattan and counted every minute of it, the way she had counted the minutes of her phone call with Lily, the way she counted everything that mattered carefully, precisely, as if the act of keeping track was itself a form of control over things that were otherwise entirely outside her hands. Dr. Park had met them at the clinic. Entrance had taken one look at Damien's shoulder and the amount of blood that had soaked through the field dressing and had said 3 words to the team behind her operating room now, before turning to Emily with a different expression. The professional one set aside for a moment, something more human in its place. "He's going to be okay," she said. "The shoulder is serious, but the bullet didn't hit anything that can't be repaired. He's going to be okay." "I know," Emily said. She didn't know. She said it anyway because the alternative was to stand in the entrance of a private clinic and fall apart, and she was not prepared to do that. She sat in the waiting room for 4 hours and 11 minutes, and she thought. Marcus sat across from her for the first 2 hours, not talking, just present in the way that Marcus was present, solid and quiet, and somehow conveying the impression that the world was unlikely to end on his watch. She found it oddly comforting. Around midnight, he got up and came back with 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her without comment, and she drank it without comment. And they sat together in the specific, companionable silence of 2 people who had been through something and didn't need to narrate it to each other. At some point after 2 in the morning, Marcus fell asleep in his chair with the unconscious competence of a man who had learned to sleep wherever he needed to. Emily did not sleep. She thought about what Damien had said in the back of the vehicle when the medical team had been working on his shoulder and she'd been holding his hand and the city had been sliding past the windows. He'd been losing blood and managing pain and still somehow talking quietly, not rambling, but talking in the deliberate way of someone who decided to say something before the opportunity was gone. You're going to want to run, he'd said, when this is finished, when you have Lily safe and there's no threat left. You're going to feel the instinct to go somewhere new and start clean and leave all of this behind. I know I am, she'd said. I'm not going to ask you not to. He'd paused, breathing through something. I just want you to know that I understand why you would. And that if you go, I won't make that complicated for you, Mo. I told you, clean, I meant clean. She'd looked at him in the shifting light of the moving vehicle. Why are you telling me this right now? Because I might not get another clear moment, he'd said, and I don't want to have been unclear. She was still turning that over 4 hours later in the waiting room. She was still turning over the specific texture of being known. Not managed, not handled, not maneuvered. Known. The difference between someone who studied your patterns in order to predict your behavior and someone who studied your patterns in order to give you room to be exactly what you were. She'd spent 3 years with the first kind of knowing. She was still learning to recognize the second kind. At 4:17 in the morning, Dr. Park came through the door. Emily was on her feet before the door finished opening. He's out, Dr. Park said. The surgery went well. The bullet caused significant damage to the rotator cuff. He's going to need months of physical therapy, and he's going to be spectacularly unhappy about that. But there was no arterial involvement and no damage to the lung. He's in recovery now. He'll be conscious within the hour. Emily sat back down. The sitting happened somewhat involuntarily, her legs making the decision without consulting her rooter. She pressed both hands flat on her thighs and looked at the floor for a moment. Thank you, she said. Dr. Park sat beside her, not across but beside which Emily noticed. Can I ask you something? Dr. Park said. Yes. How are you doing and not, are you injured? How are you actually doing? Emily looked at her. Dr. Park had a direct quality that didn't feel intrusive, the kind of directness that came from decades of sitting with people in the worst moments of their lives and deciding that honesty was more respectful than false comfort. I don't know yet, Emily said honestly. I think I've been in operational mode for the last, I don't even know how many hours. I think once I stop, I'm going to have a very difficult few days. That's accurate, Dr. Park said. And normal, for what it's worth. She paused. He's been different since Prague, since you specifically. I've worked with Damien for 4 years, and I have watched him be very careful about keeping certain parts of himself in a sealed room. This last week, those rooms have been open in ways I haven't seen before. Emily looked at her. You're telling me this, why? Because you're about to make a decision, Dr. Park said simply, and I thought you should have complete information. She stood and went back through the door, and Emily sat with what she'd said in the particular quiet of 4:30 in the morning, when the world was at its most honest and there was nowhere left to hide from the things you actually thought. At 5:48 in the morning, a nurse came out and said Damien was asking for her. Not his phone, not Marcus, not a lawyer or a contact or anyone with a function. Her. She followed the nurse down a hallway and through a door, and Damien was in a hospital bed with his left shoulder immobilized and an IV in his right arm, in the specific appearance of someone who had recently been through surgery and was working hard to seem more alert than he was. He looked up when she came in, and the thing that crossed his face was so unguarded that she stopped in the doorway for a moment. Hey, he said, his voice was rough. Hey. She came the rest of the way in and sat in the chair beside the bed. 4 hours and 11 minutes, she said, in case you wanted to know. Were you counting always? He almost smiled. How's your ankle? My ankle would like to lodge a formal complaint with management, she said. It'll survive. She looked at him, the immobilized shoulder, the IV, the pallor underneath his usual coloring. You stepped in front of a bullet. We've discussed this. I want to discuss it again. Emily, I need you to understand, she said, that I am not someone who needs to be protected by having other people absorb damage on their behalf. I'm capable of... I know you're capable, he said. That's not why I did it. Then why? He looked at her for a moment. His eyes were clearer than they should have been, given the circumstances, she thought, focused in the particular way of someone who had decided that this conversation was not going to be deferred, regardless of the condition he was in. Because the idea of you being shot, he said, was not something I was willing to accept as an outcome. That's it. That's the whole reason. It wasn't a calculation. It wasn't strategy. I was not willing to let that happen. He held her gaze. I know that's not a satisfying answer for someone who runs on logic and planning. I know it probably feels like exactly the kind of decision someone should consult you about before making. I'm telling you it wasn't a decision. It was a fact. She sat with that. Outside the window, the first gray light of early morning was starting to ease into the dark. She could hear the city beginning its slow return to its self-distant traffic, a horn somewhere, the particular sound of New York deciding to wake up whether anyone was ready or not. The FBI, she said finally. What's happening with Hargrove? He accepted the redirect without comment. My people delivered the documentation to Assistant Director Crane at midnight. Crane is someone I've had indirect contact with before, not a personal relationship, but a reputation. He's clean, old school. He shifted slightly, winced, held it. Hargrove was detained at his home at 2 this morning. He won't be a variable anymore. And Vincent, in federal custody. The documentation from your flash drive analysis is being processed as material evidence. The immunity arrangement for your cooperation is being drafted by someone who answers to Crane, not to Hargrove. He paused. You're going to be a witness, Emily, not a defendant. It's over. She heard the words. She understood them. She sat with the shape of them and tried to locate what she felt somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the physical pain and the accumulated weight of the last several days. What she felt was rage. Not at the resolution was right. What she felt was the specific retroactive fury of understanding fully and completely the architecture of what had been done to her. 3 years of her life, 3 years of carrying the weight of it, telling herself it was her own fault for the choices she'd made, that she'd walked into the trap with open eyes and didn't have the right to resent the trap for being a trap. 3 years of believing she was making desperate choices, when in fact the choices had been manufactured for her with considerable care and sophistication. She was angry. She was so angry she felt it in her teeth. Say it, Damien said. She looked at him. Say whatever you're feeling right now. You don't have to manage it in here. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the rooms she'd learned to manage herself in, all the expressions she'd learned to smooth out, all the feelings she'd learned to route through logic before they reached her face, all the years of making herself small and functional and useful and unthreatening, because that was the only way to survive the environment she'd been deliberately placed in. I'm furious, she said. I'm so angry I can barely sit still. Not at you, not at the resolution, She stopped, restarted. I was 28 years old when I walked into Vincent's office. I thought I'd found a way to save my sister. I thought it was my choice, my risk, my responsibility. I spent 3 years carrying all of it as mine. Her voice was steady. She made sure of that. It wasn't mine. He built the whole thing and put me inside it and watched me take responsibility for his construction. She stopped again. You survived it, Damien said quietly. That's not enough. No, he said. It's not, but it's the beginning of enough. She looked at her hands. She thought about the kitchen in Tacoma Flower and dancing the most ordinary happy memory she owned. She thought about Lily in Zurich fighting through treatment cycles, making jokes about her hair beating nurses at cards. She thought about herself at 25 before any of this, sitting in a coffee shop somewhere and being simply a person with a life in front of her that hadn't been architected by someone else. She wanted that back, not the naivety. She didn't think she could get that back, and she wasn't sure she'd want it if she could, but the possibility, the sense that the story wasn't written in advance, that she could be moving towards something rather than always already inside someone else's plan. I want to ask you something, she said. Yes. The documentation you have on me, everything your people gathered in 4 years of watching, the Prague files, the Morelli period, all of it. She looked at him directly. I want it destroyed. All copies. I want to not exist in anyone's files anymore. He didn't hesitate. Done. Today, he confirmed. Marcus will handle it personally. She nodded. She breathed. The anger was still there, but it had shifted slightly from the directionless kind that had nowhere to go to the kind that was beginning to understand what it was for. A knock at the door. Marcus opened it, looked at both of them, registered the quality of the room, and adjusted his expression accordingly. Lily's doctor called, he said. Dr. Krause, she says Lily completed her morning rounds and is asking whether she can have a video call this afternoon. Emily felt something loosen in her chest. It happened involuntarily, a physical thing, the release of a tension she'd been holding at such a constant level that she'd stopped registering it as tension. Yes, she said, absolutely yes. What time? Dr. Krause suggested 2 o'clock. I'll be there, she looked at Damien. We can use... There's a secure line in the next room, he said. You can use it for as long as you need. She stood, then stopped. She looked at him in the hospital bed, shoulder immobilized IV in his arm, the carefully maintained composure showing its seams at the edges after surgery and blood loss in a night that would have undone most people she'd ever met. She had been about to say something practical, something about the FBI timeline or the immunity documentation or the next logistical step in the sequence of steps that still needed to happen. Instead, she said, when you're recovered, when all of this is settled and there's nothing left that needs managing. She held his gaze. I want to meet Maya. He went very still. Your niece, she said, 9 years old in Colorado. You sent my sister flowers with no name on the card. I want to meet the person who raised someone who does that. I didn't raise her, he said. She raised herself mostly. I just made sure she had room to. That's what good people do, Emily said. They make room. He looked at her with the expression that she was beginning to be able to read the one that lived behind all his careful control, the one that came to the surface in moments when he wasn't fast enough to redirect it. She was beginning to understand that this expression was not a weakness. It was the truest thing about him. I'll set it up, he said, as soon as I'm cleared to travel. Don't rush the shoulder. I won't. I mean it, Damien. Months of physical therapy. Dr. Park was very specific. Are you going to be this attentive to my recovery process in general? She considered that. Probably, she said. You should know that about me up front. Noted, he said, and this time it was unambiguous. It was a smile, a real one, the kind that changed his whole face. She left him to rest and went to find the secure line and called Dr. Krause. And while she waited for the connection to go through, she stood in a quiet room in a private clinic in Manhattan and let herself feel for just a moment the specific, enormous weight of everything that had been survived. 3 years, an ankle that was going to take 6 weeks to heal properly, ribs that were going to ache every time it rained for the rest of the winter, 8 stitches in her side. And somewhere in Zurich, her sister, who had flowers on her windowsill and was beating nurses at cards and was going to beat this thing, was going to come through. It was going to be standing on the other side of it someday soon, and this was all going to be something that happened to them rather than something that was happening. Dr. Krause picked up. Ms. Carter, I was hoping you'd call this morning. How is she? Emily said. Her blood work from this morning shows significant improvement in her white cell response. A pause. We may be looking at a shorter course of treatment remaining than we initially projected. I don't want to give you numbers yet. I've learned that numbers make people stop fighting before the fight is done. But the trajectory is good. It's genuinely good. Emily put her hand on the wall. She needed the wall for a moment. Okay, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Okay, thank you. She wants to talk to you herself, Dr. Krause said. She's been asking since 6 this morning. But I told her you might need to rest. Put her on, Emily said. Please, I've been resting. There was the sound of movement, a door familiar, institutional sounds, and then Lily's voice, which was stronger than the last time, perceptibly, genuinely stronger. And Emily noticed this the way you noticed the first day of spring, with a quality of attention that was almost physical. A pause. You sound different. Different how, less like you're carrying something really heavy. Another pause. Did something happen? Emily thought about a pier in Seattle, a man in the rain, a flash drive with 47 folders, 4 hours and 11 minutes in a waiting room counting every minute, a shoulder that was going to need months of physical therapy. Some things got resolved, she said. Good resolved or bad resolved. Good, she said. Really good, actually. Lily was quiet for a moment. Are you going to tell me, eventually, when I have more of it sorted out in my own head? Emily moved to sit in the chair by the window. Dr. Krause says your blood work looked good this morning. She told you that? Lily's voice shifted, trying to sound casual and not quite landing it. She told me to be cautiously optimistic, which from Dr. Krause is basically the equivalent of throwing a parade. It's good news, Lily. Yeah. A breath. Yeah, it is. Another pause, different this time, the kind with something underneath it. I need to ask you something. Ask. The last couple of months. The last since I've been here, actually. You've seemed different, more scared than you usually let yourself seem. And I know you don't tell me things because you're trying to protect me, and I know why you do that, and I'm not angry about it. A pause. But I want to know if you're okay. The real answer, not the one you think I can handle. Emily looked at the ceiling. She thought about all the things she'd been carrying that Lily didn't know about, all the weight she'd been routing around her sister to keep Lily's view of the world from being contaminated by the full truth of what Emily had been doing to keep her alive. I was in a very bad situation, she said. For a while, it's over now, all of it, the whole situation, it's resolved, and we're okay, and you're safe, and I'm safe. How bad? Very bad. She kept her voice even. I'll tell you everything when you're here. When you're better and you're here, and we can sit somewhere with real coffee, and I can tell you the whole thing with proper context. There's a man, Lily said suddenly. Emily blinked. What? The flowers, with no name on them. I'm sick, not oblivious. The flowers in the new account that covers my treatment, and the way you sound right now, which is different in a specific way. A pause. There's a man. Emily was quiet for a moment. It's complicated, she said. Lily made a sound that was entirely essentially her exasperated and fond simultaneously. Of course it's complicated. Do you know how to do anything that isn't complicated? No, Emily said honestly. Is he good to you? Emily thought about the pier, crouching in the rain to get to her eye level, hands visible, moving slowly, asking instead of taking. A flash drive set on a table between them. 4 hours and 11 minutes. A shoulder taking a bullet that had been aimed somewhere else. Yes, she said. He is. Okay. Lily's voice settled into something quieter. Okay, then I want to meet him. When this is all done and I'm out of here, I want to meet him. He wants to meet you too, Emily said. And she said it without qualification because it was true. She knew it was true, the way she knew things she'd verified and cross-referenced and could stand behind completely. They talked for another 40 minutes. Lily told her about the nurse who'd brought her a book she hadn't asked for but turned out to be exactly what she needed. She told her about another patient on the ward, a man in his 70s named Arthur, who was 3 months into treatment and had decided to learn Italian to pass the time and had been teaching Lily words at dinner. She told her about a dream she'd had about their mother's kitchen flower and dancing the radio on. Emily closed her eyes when Lily said that. She kept them closed for a moment. I had that dream too, she said. Not long ago. Maybe she's still watching us, Lily said. Not with grief exactly, with the particular matter-of-fact warmth of someone who'd had a long time in a hospital bed to make peace with the things she couldn't control. Maybe, Emily said. After she hung up, she sat for a while in the quiet room and let herself feel all of it. The relief and the anger and the exhaustion and the complicated specific thing. She didn't have a clean name for yet, the thing that had something to do with a man in a hospital bed 2 rooms away who had made her tell him the real answer and hadn't looked away from it. She sat with all of it without managing any of it. Then she stood up and straightened herself out and went back to Damien's room because she'd told him she would be attentive to his recovery process, and she intended to follow through on what she said. She was a woman who followed through. He was awake when she came in. He looked up immediately. How is she? He said. Better, Emily said. Really better. The blood work is improving. She sat in the chair beside his bed. She wants to meet you. He looked at her, something careful and steady in his face. I'd like that. She also figured out about the flowers. A pause. How? Because she's sharp and she was paying attention, and apparently the anonymous gesture was not as anonymous as intended. I'll keep that in mind for the future, he said. She said they were ridiculous, Emily said. In a good way, movie-level ridiculous was the exact phrase. They were from the best florist in Zurich, he said with the particular dignity of a man defending a choice he was not going to apologize for. I don't do things halfway. No, she said. You don't. They looked at each other in the early morning light. Outside, New York was fully awake now, doing what New York did regardless of what anyone else was going through, moving loud, indifferent in the specific way of very large things that have existed long enough to know that individual moments pass. But in this room, in this particular moment, something was happening that was not passing. Something was settling into place with the specific solidity of things that are real. She reached out and put her hand over his where it lay on the bed, not taking it, just covering it. The same grounding touch she'd used on the floor of Vincent's safe house, the same language that didn't need words. He turned his hand over and held hers. Marcus has a question about the next logistical step, he said after a moment. Tell Marcus it can wait an hour. He's fairly certain it's time sensitive. Tell him it can wait 59 minutes then. He looked at her. You're staying. I'm staying, she said, for 59 minutes. Then we'll deal with Marcus. And after Marcus, she thought about it. She thought about what came after the FBI timeline, the immunity documentation, the months of physical therapy he was going to resent and do anyway, the flight she would eventually book to Zurich, the conversation she would have with Lily in some cafe with real coffee when she told her the whole story from the beginning. She thought about Colorado and a 9-year-old named Maya who had been sick 2 years ago and had gotten through it. She thought about what it meant to move towards something. After Marcus, she said, we figure out the rest. He was quiet for a moment, then, that's enough. Yes, she said, it was. The morning light moved across the room, slow and certain, the way light always moved regardless of what the people inside it were going through, and Emily Carter held the hand of the man who had found her dying on a pier and refused to let her go, and for the first time in a very long time, she did not feel the need to plan an exit. She was exactly where she had decided to be, and that all by itself was entirely new. The immunity agreement was signed on a Tuesday. Emily sat across from Assistant Director Crane in a conference room in the FBI's Manhattan field office, with a lawyer she'd chosen herself, not one of Damien's her own, a woman named Patricia Osei who had 20 years of federal criminal defense experience and eyes that missed nothing, and she read every line of the agreement before she signed it. Crane waited without impatience, which she respected. He was a man in his early 60s with close-cropped gray hair and the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that the most effective thing you could do in a room was be the least reactive person in it. She signed on the 4th page, and Patricia countersigned, and Crane slid the document into a folder. And that was the moment Emily Carter legally ceased to be a person with outstanding federal exposure. It felt less dramatic than she'd expected. It felt like something clicking into place, a quiet, definitive sound, a lock turning the right direction for once. We're going to need your testimony in the Morelli proceeding, Crane said. And in the matter of Agent Hargrove, I want to be clear that this is going to be a long process. These things don't resolve in weeks. I understand long processes, Emily said. I imagine you do. He looked at her with the directness of someone delivering real information, not managing her. Hargrove is cooperating. Partially, he's protecting someone. We don't know who yet. There may be a layer to this that we haven't fully mapped. She looked at him steadily. Tell me when you find it. I'll tell you if it connects to anything I know. That's what we're hoping for. He paused. Ms. Carter, what you provided, the shadow account analysis, the shell structure documentation, our financial crimes division has been trying to find that thread for 2 years. 2 years. He held her gaze. You found it in an afternoon. I built part of it, she said. It helps to know the architecture from the inside. Yes, he said, it does. He gathered his folders. I'd like to have your formal deposition within the next 2 weeks. Your lawyer has my contact. She stood and shook his hand, and Patricia shook his hand, and they left together through the lobby and out onto the street, and the November air hit Emily's face, and she stopped on the sidewalk and just breathed for a moment. Patricia stood beside her. You did well in there. Thank you for your help. That's what you're paying me for. A pause. For what it's worth, in 20 years of doing this, I've seen a lot of people come through agreements like the one we just signed. Most of them are relieved. Some of them are angry. You're the first one who looked like you were taking inventory. Emily looked at her. I'm always taking inventory. I know. Patricia almost smiled. I'll be in touch about the deposition timeline. In the meantime, stay available and don't go anywhere without telling me first. She paused. And Ms. Carter, go rest. Actual rest, whatever that means to you. She walked away down the street, and Emily stood on the sidewalk with the folder containing her copy of the immunity agreement and thought about what actual rest meant to her because she genuinely wasn't sure she remembered. Marcus was waiting with the car. He looked at her face when she got in and said, Done. Done, she said. How do you feel? She thought about it. Like something finished, she said. I don't know what starts yet, but something finished. He nodded once and pulled into traffic, and Emily looked out the window at the city moving past and let herself simply sit without planning anything for the first time in longer than she could accurately calculate. Damien was at the secondary house, not the clinic anymore. He'd been discharged 3 days after the surgery over Dr. Park's stated preference for a longer observation period, which Emily had also been vocal about, and which he had overruled with the cheerful certainty of a man who felt that his own shoulder was within his jurisdiction. He was doing the physical therapy. She knew this because she had asked Dr. Park to send her the schedule and she checked it. And when she told him she was checking it, he looked at her with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and something warmer that he didn't try to hide. She let herself in with the key Marcus had given her, a development that she had noticed and chosen not to examine too closely, and found Damien in the main room on the phone. He held up one finger when he saw her, the universal sign for one moment, and she sat down and checked her own phone while she waited. There was a message from Dr. Krause. She opened it immediately. It was 3 sentences. Emily read them once, then she read them again. She was still reading them for the 3rd time when Damien finished his call. What happened, he said. He read her face the way he read everything quickly and accurately without needing to be told. She held up the phone. He took it and read. She watched his face while he did. She saw the moment it landed. He looked up. Lily's last scan. Clean, Emily said. The word came out of her in a way that didn't sound like talking, more like the word had been inside her under significant pressure and had finally found the exit. The last scan came back clean. Dr. Krause says she wants to keep her for one more round of observation, but the word she used is remarkable. She said Lily's response has been remarkable. Damien set down the phone. He looked at Emily with the specific quality of someone who understood exactly what this meant. Not just medically, not just logistically, but the full weight of it. What it cost, what it took. What a person did when the person they loved most in the world was dying, and there was no good door left, and they opened the one that looked like the devil's anyway, because the alternative was unthinkable. Emily, he said. She was already on her feet, and she didn't entirely know when she'd stood up. She was standing in the middle of the room, and something was happening in her chest that she didn't have controlled vocabulary for not crying. She wasn't going to cry. That wasn't what this was, but something that felt like the specific release of a structure that had been load-bearing for years. Something that had been holding everything else up, finally getting to set down its weight. She put her face in her hands for a moment. Just one moment. Damien crossed the room and he put his good arm around her, the right arm, careful of his shoulder, careful of her ribs, and he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. That the moment didn't already contain, and she stood in the circle of his arm, with her face in her hands, and let 3 years of carried weight do what weight did when you finally stopped moving. It didn't take long. She'd always been efficient, even at this. She took her hands away from her face and straightened and breathed. Okay, she said. Okay, he agreed. She stepped back and looked at him. His shoulder was healing slower than he wanted, faster than Dr. Park had projected, which seemed entirely consistent with who he was. He looked better than he had in the clinic. He looked, she thought, like himself, which she was still in the process of learning the full definition of. I need to go to Zurich, she said. I know. Soon, this week, if Dr. Krause thinks Lily is stable enough for me to be there without disrupting her routine. I'll have the flight arranged today. Commercial, she said. He paused. Emily. Commercial, she repeated. I need to do something normally. Just one thing completely normally. I need to sit in a regular seat on a regular plane and read a bad in-flight magazine and drink terrible coffee and arrive at an airport like a person. He looked at her for a moment. Business class, he said. That's my offer. Business class commercial. She considered this. Fine. You're going to want the sleep on the flight. I know, you're right. I hate that you're right. You'll get used to it, he said with the absolute confidence of a man who had decided this was a permanent feature of his future. She looked at him. She thought about all the conversations that were still ahead of them, the ones about what his life actually was, the ones about what she wanted hers to become, the ones about the specific, complicated mathematics of two people who lived in the spaces between things coming together in a way that made sense. There were a lot of those conversations. She didn't know where all of them came out. She also thought about the fact that she was not afraid of those conversations. That was new. Come with me, she said. He went still. To Zurich. Lily wants to meet you. You want to meet her. Dr. Kraus says the trajectory is good. She held his gaze. Your shoulder is healing, not healed, which means you can't do anything strenuous, which means you have no reasonable excuse to stay here and manage things remotely when Marcus can manage things remotely perfectly well. She paused. Come with me. He looked at her for a long moment. Business class, he said. 2 seats, she said, right next to each other. Done, he said. They flew out on Thursday. Emily slept for 4 hours on the flight, which was 2 more than she'd expected and considerably more than she'd managed in the last 2 weeks. She woke up over the Atlantic with her head at an angle that her neck was going to register a complaint about, and Damien was awake beside her reading something on a tablet, and when he noticed her stir, he looked over without saying anything, just the acknowledgement of presence. The easy awareness of someone who was comfortable simply being in the same space. She straightened and accepted the coffee the flight attendant brought and looked out at nothing but dark sky and stars for a while. Tell me about Maya, she said. He set down the tablet. He talked about Maya the way people talked about the things they loved most. Not with performance, but with the specific, unself-conscious quality of someone who wasn't monitoring themselves, because the subject made monitoring feel beside the point. Maya was 9 and had opinions about everything and had recently decided that the most important skill she could develop was the ability to identify edible plants in the wild. A project that had involved considerable research and one memorably alarming incident with something she'd been fairly confident was wild garlic. She was funny in a way that caught you off guard. Damien said the kind of funny that didn't announce itself, that arrived when you weren't expecting it, and left you wondering how a 9-year-old had developed that particular timing. She sounds like someone who is going to be formidable, Emily said. She already is, he said. She's been formidable since she was 4. I take no credit. I just tried not to get in the way. That's what good people do, Emily said. It was what she'd told him before in the hospital room. He'd heard it then, and he heard it again. Now the callback registered in the small shift of his expression. Her parents, Emily said. Your brother. A beat. My sister, he said. Anna. She and her husband were killed in a car accident when Maya was 2. Anna asked me to be Maya's guardian when she was pregnant. I thought it was one of those things you agreed to without ever thinking it would actually happen. A pause. It happened. I'm sorry about Anna. So am I, every day. He said it simply without making a production of it, the way people talked about losses that had become part of the landscape of who they were. Maya has her laugh, exactly her laugh. It still catches me sometimes. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about what it meant to carry people who were gone inside you, the weight of them, but also the specific gift of them, the way they kept existing in the things they'd passed forward. She thought about her mother and Lily's stubbornness and her own efficiency. She thought about kitchens and flour and dancing. She's going to be fine, you know, Emily said. Maya, whatever comes next, she's already fine. He looked at her. How do you know? Because she has someone who checked her watch every 30 seconds during her chemo and sent flowers from the best florist in whatever city he was in and calls her every night. Emily held his gaze. Kids know when someone shows up for them, it's the most important thing. You showed up. He didn't say anything for a moment. She watched him absorb it. Thank you, he said finally. Low genuine. I'm just telling you what I see. Zurich was cold and clean, and the clinic smelled like every clinic Emily had ever been in: antiseptic, enforced warmth, and the particular emotional charge of a place where people were fighting for their lives. She knew how to walk through that smell now. She'd been walking through it for a long time. Dr. Kraus met them in the lobby. She was exactly as Emily had imagined from their phone calls, silver-streaked, precise, warm, in a manner that was entirely professional and entirely genuine simultaneously. She shook Emily's hand with both of hers, which said something, and she shook Damien's hand and looked at him with the expression of someone meeting a name they'd heard frequently. She's been awake since 5 this morning, Dr. Kraus said. She told the night nurse she was too excited to sleep, which is, in my experience, that kind of energy is its own kind of medicine. Emily smiled. That's Lily. They went up together, the 3 of them, and Emily felt with every step the specific reality of this moment, that she was here, that Lily was on the other side of a door, at the end of a hallway, that the word clean had been in a text message on her phone 2 days ago, that the last several years had been survived, and she was standing on the other side of them. She stopped outside the door. Damien stopped beside her. You should go in first, he said. Take the time you need, I'll be out here. She looked at him. You're going to stand in the hallway. For however long you need. She shook her head once, not in negation, just at the fact of him. The specific fact of who he was, which she was still mapping, and which kept turning out to have more in it than she'd found so far. Come in, she said. Come in and meet her. She opened the door. Lily was sitting up in the bed, and she looked thinner than Emily's memory of her, which was always the shock of it. No matter how many times you prepared yourself, the first sight of someone you loved diminished by illness, reorganized something in your chest. But her eyes were bright. Her eyes were entirely, completely, undeniably bright. And when she saw Emily, she made a sound and reached out both arms like she was 10 years old again in that kitchen in Tacoma. And Emily crossed the room and held her carefully, so carefully aware of every fragile place. And Lily held her back with surprising strength for someone 3 weeks out from her last treatment cycle. They didn't say anything for a long time. When they separated, Lily looked over Emily's shoulder at the man standing just inside the door, and she looked at him with the particular evaluating attention of someone who had spent weeks in a hospital bed thinking about this moment. You're him, she said. Damien met her gaze directly. I'm him, he said. The flowers were good, Lily said. Too many, but good. I'll calibrate better next time, he said. Lily looked at Emily. Something crossed her face, a quick, specific thing, the assessment of a person who knew her sister better than anyone alive. She looked back at Damien. She doesn't do this, she said. She doesn't bring people in. She hasn't brought someone into a room with me in. She looked at Emily. Has this ever happened before? No, Emily said honestly. Lily looked at Damien again. So whatever you did, she said, it must have been significant. He found me when I needed finding, Emily said, and he didn't leave. Lily absorbed this. She sat with it the way she sat with things directly without flinching, with the particular courage of someone who had spent enough time in hospital beds to know that the truth was almost always easier to hold than the suspense of not knowing it. Okay, she said finally. Then sit down, both of you. I want to hear the whole story, and Emily is going to try to edit it into something manageable. And I need you there to give me the parts she leaves out. Damien looked at Emily. Emily looked at Lily. The whole story is long. I have time, Lily said. I literally have nothing but time right now. Sit down. They sat. Emily started talking. She told it the way she'd promised she would, the whole thing from the beginning with actual context. Prague and the accounting job and the months of slow understanding of what she'd walked into and the calculations that had felt like choices and the moment she'd understood they weren't. She told it plainly because Lily deserved plain. She didn't perform it and she didn't minimize it and she didn't route it through any of the filters she'd spent years installing. Twice Lily's eyes filled. She didn't let it stop her listening. At the parts where Damien had acted, Emily looked at him to let him add whatever she'd gotten wrong. He added very little. He didn't need to. She'd gotten it right. When she got to the pier, Lily reached out and took her hand and held it and didn't let go through the rest of it. When Emily finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. I want to say something, Lily said. She was looking at Damien, and I want to say it directly because I think you're someone who prefers that. I am, he said. My sister has been taking care of everything her whole life, Lily said. Since we were kids, since our mom got sick the first time before she died. Emily was the one who managed it, who figured out what the insurance covered and what it didn't, who picked up extra shifts and called the billing departments and made sure I didn't have to be scared. She paused. She's been the person standing between the hard thing and everyone she loves for so long that I don't think she remembers what it feels like to have someone standing between the hard thing and her. She held Damien's gaze. You did that. On that pier and in that house and in every decision you made in that week. You stood between the hard thing and her. Another pause. I need you to keep doing it. Damien was quiet for a moment. I intend to, he said. I'm not asking for a grand gesture, Lily said. I'm asking for consistency, because she'll test it. She tests everything. She doesn't mean to, but she's been let down enough that she needs to know the thing is real before she trusts it. And the only way to know a thing is real is to watch it hold up over time. She looked at Emily. I'm sorry, I'm talking about you like you're not here. You're not wrong, Emily said quietly. I know I'm not. Lily squeezed her hand. I also know you've already decided something. I can see it. You decided something, and you haven't named it yet. Emily looked at her sister. She thought about the last several weeks. She thought about the things she'd told herself on the pier, that dying was simpler than continuing to fight. In the specific wrongness of that calculation, the way it felt now, like something she'd said in a foreign language that she didn't speak anymore. I decided to stop running, she said. I've been running since I was for a very long time. Running from things, running toward things, running because staying felt like it had had too high a cost. She looked at Damien, then back at Lily. I'm done. I'm done running. Lily looked at her for a long moment. Something in her face, not surprise, but its opposite, the deep recognition of someone hearing something they'd been waiting a long time to hear. Good, she said simply. They stayed for 6 hours. They ate bad hospital food and good chocolate that Damien had apparently arranged to have delivered, which Lily accepted without comment and ate with obvious satisfaction. Arthur, the man learning Italian 3 rooms down, appeared in the doorway at some point and said something to Lily in halting Italian, and Lily responded in equally halting Italian, and there was an exchange that Emily didn't follow, but that made both of them laugh. Damien watched all of it with the quiet attention of someone who was learning the shape of something he wanted to understand. When Lily started to tire, Emily recognized that the specific quality of exhaustion that good days and treatment had in common, the way the brightness dimmed by degrees. She stood and said they were going, and Lily didn't argue, which meant she was more tired than she was showing. Emily hugged her at the door. She held on longer than she meant to. Lily held on too. Lily said quietly against her shoulder. Yeah, you did good. Everything you did, I know what it cost. I know what you gave up. And you did good. She pulled back and looked at her sister's face. She thought about all the things she could say. She thought about how inadequate language was sometimes for the actual size of what you felt. So did you, she said. You fought like hell. We both did, Lily said. That's what we do. In the hallway, Damien was waiting. He looked at Emily's face and didn't ask, just fell into step beside her, and they walked down the hallway and out of the ward and into the elevator. And when the doors closed, she leaned her shoulder against his and stayed there, and he stayed still to let her. And neither of them said anything because nothing needed saying. Outside the clinic, the cold hit them again, clean and sharp. There's something I need to tell you, Damien said. She looked at him. Tell me. The FBI investigation is going to take 18 months. Minimum. The Morelli proceeding, the Hargrove case, you're going to be tied to New York for most of that time. I know. I have a house in the city, he said. Not the safe house, my actual home. I've lived there for 6 years. It has room. He looked at her steadily. I'm not offering you a situation. I'm not offering you a position in my world or proximity to my resources or anything with strings on it. I'm asking if you want to be somewhere that's real, somewhere that's yours as much as mine for as long as you want it to be. She looked at him. She thought about what she'd said to Lily, about running and the decision to stop. She thought about all the rooms she'd managed herself in, all the exits she'd mapped before she sat down, all the years of making sure she always knew where the door was. She knew where the door was. She always would. That was just who she was. But knowing where the door was and needing to use it were different things. She'd confused them for a long time. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Just yes. Just yes, she said. You wanted clarity. That's clarity. He was quiet for a moment, and then he did something she hadn't seen him do before he laughed. A real one, not the almost smile or the controlled warmth or the ghost of something at the edge of his expression. A real laugh, low and genuine, and slightly startled, like he'd been caught off guard by his own relief. It changed his whole face. She thought she was going to be thinking about that laugh for a long time. They flew back to New York that night, and the city received them the way it always received everyone, without ceremony, without acknowledgement, with the particular magnificent indifference of something too large to notice individual arrivals. Lights everywhere. The hum of it. The sense that 10,000 stories were happening simultaneously in every direction. Damien's house was on the Upper West Side, a brownstone that had been lived in, actually lived in, with the accumulated warmth of a place where someone had been present rather than just occupying space. There were books on real shelves. There was a kitchen that had seen actual use. There was a photograph on the hall table of a small girl, maybe 4 years old, grinning with something green on her face that was probably the alarming wild garlic incident in its early stages. Emily stood in the hallway and looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she set down her bag and walked into the kitchen and found the coffee maker and figured out how it worked and started a pot. Because that was what you did in a new place. You found the thing that made you feel at home, and you used it, and you let the smell of it fill the room, and you let the ordinary ritual of it say something that the moment was too large for words to say. Damien appeared in the doorway. He looked at her at his kitchen counter making coffee like she'd done it 100 times. "Patricia called," he said. "The deposition is scheduled for 2 weeks from Monday. I'll be ready. Crane wants a preliminary conversation before that. Set it up. And Maya's school has a winter performance in 3 weeks. She's been asking if you're going to be there." He paused. "I told her I'd ask." Emily turned and looked at him. 3 weeks from now, she would be in New York, testimony pending immunity, signed Lily getting stronger in a clinic in Zurich, a 9-year-old waiting to see if she showed up to a winter performance. She would be here. She would be somewhere she had chosen for reasons that were entirely her own, moving toward a seeing something instead of away. "Tell her yes," she said. He held her gaze. "Yes, yes," she said. "Tell her I'll be there." He nodded once. He came into the kitchen and poured 2 cups of the coffee she'd made and set one in front of her and kept one. And they stood on opposite sides of his kitchen counter in the quiet of a late November night in New York City. And the world continued outside in all its ordinary noise. And inside there was just the coffee and the warmth and 2 people who had come through something and arrived against considerable odds here. She picked up her cup. He picked up his. Nothing dramatic, nothing performed. Just 2 people standing in a kitchen at the end of a long road holding something warm, deciding that this was where they were. Emily Carter had spent 3 years being someone else's piece on someone else's board, carrying weight that wasn't hers to carry, running calculations that someone else had designed, moving in directions that had been engineered before she ever started walking. She had run out of pier. She had been found. She had fought her way back through everything that had been done to her with the truth in a flash drive, in a fury that turned out to be the most useful thing she owned. And she had stopped. Not because she was tired, not because she had run out of options, not because someone had caught her and held her in place. She had stopped because she had finally, after 31 years, arrived somewhere worth staying. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And it was for the first time in a very long time enough.